Yes. It is good to be here with you this morning, and what a blessing to be here. And I tell you, Brother Kenneth, thank you for leading us in worship through music this morning. And thank you, George, for putting up with my sweet bride this morning, singing with her. An elderly couple who had just celebrated their 75th wedding anniversary just a few months prior. The both of them got sick one evening, and that very evening, just minutes apart, both of them passed away and moved from this life to life eternal. They lived in a very rural area, and as they lived in this rural area, as their children grew up and they moved away, received their higher education and for employment, raising their families there in the areas that they had moved to. It restricted this couple's opportunity to see their grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow up, only being able to see them very limited occasions. After this couple had passed away, the children, the grandchildren, and great-grandchildren all met together, and as they met together to discuss that rural property that these wonderful parents had lived on for many years, chose to settle the estate by auctioning everything that they had off. The day for the auction came, and as that day came to settle that estate, the auction began by selling their cars, all of the yard equipment, the home that they had grown up in and was so dear to their hearts. And then everything inside was auctioned off, item by item, one after another. A lonely case was sitting there at the very end, and the auctioneer tried his very best to get someone to bid on that case. It was not visible what was inside the case. The only thing was to see that case that was old and tattered and covered with dust. No one would say a word. No one would bid not one penny on that case. A gentleman sitting there had been there through the entire auction, walks up and brushes off the dust off the case, opens the case, and inside that case was a violin, the bow and the wax for the strings. He gently picked up the bow and the wax and began to wax that bow. Picked up the violin and began to adjust it, and then began to play. The auctioneer, unsure about what to do, remained silent. And as the gentleman played the violin, people began to bid. Higher and higher and higher they bid on that violin. And finally, the bidding stopped. And the price that was bid on that far exceeded everything else that was bid on, all put together. And someone asked the question, said, why? What made the difference? The difference was the man that went and picked up the violin and began to play it was a master violinist and enjoyed playing that old Stradivarius. And it was the master's touch, because he was a master violinist, that made the difference. And that's what made the difference in what was bid on for that item. But that master's touch. This morning my message is entitled, "The Touch of the Master's Hand." And I would like for us to tiptoe through the gospel accounts of our Master, the Lord Jesus Christ, as he touched people's hands, touched their eyes, touched their bodies, and the difference that he made. As we tiptoe through the Gospels, beginning there in Matthew chapter 8, verses 2 and 3, we see an account about a leper. Now, Mary and I in 1998 were in Bangladesh. And as we were there in Dhaka, we had the opportunity of seeing some people with leprosy. And I want to tell you, it was not a very pretty sight. When you study through Leviticus chapter 13 and 14, you see there how the priests were to deal with those with leprosy. That those with leprosy, they would examine them, and if it was true that they had leprosy, they were cast out of that compound or village or whatever that they lived in. They had to live on the outside. And in verses 2 and 3, we see the words, "And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed." Can you imagine the rejection from family, from friends, being cast out of your home, and the loneliness and just needing someone to just care? The mental and physical pain from the sores that would not heal. But here comes Jesus, coming to someone that it was told to those lepers that if you saw someone coming, that you must yell out, "Unclean, unclean, unclean." And yet here Jesus comes on, and doing what no one else will do, he touches this leper, and immediately his leprosy is healed and restoration comes. And I think about what a powerful touch of the Master's hand. Again, we see another account in Matthew 8, 14 and 15. And when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law laying sick with a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she rose and began to serve. Realizing that just recently Jesus had called Peter to come and follow him. He had called him to leave that nets and boats behind, to follow him, to go wherever he was leading him to go, to be a part of that ministry that he called him into. As Peter's journeying along with Jesus, here the word comes that his mother-in-law is sick. And Jesus goes to this home and reaches out and touches her. An amazing thing happens is that here she's running a fever one moment. Jesus touches her, and immediately the fever is gone, and she gets up and begins to serve him. It's a powerful touch. I thought about this morning as I was reflecting upon this. Tylenol can't touch that, folks. Boy, what Jesus can do with his touch. We see another account in Matthew 9, 18 through 26. It says, while he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came and knelt before him, saying, My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. Jesus rose and followed him and his disciples. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house, he saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion. And he said, Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. When the crowd had been put out, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went through all that district. We see so much of this in today's world where people are laughing about the things of our Lord, discrediting the work of our Lord, trying to minimize what God and only God can do. The persecution, we talked about that in Sunday school this morning. As Peter wrote there about the persecution going on of those Christians that first century. Think about the persecution that's going on around our world today for just being Christian. The lives that are being taken just because people have a personal relationship with Christ. I think about how persecution is just gradually creeping in on this country. I think about how when I was in school those early years, all the way through the time I graduated, every morning in school began with prayer. And now there's no prayer in the school. I think about a lot of the activities that went on in the community centered around church, and how it seems that every worldly thing there is taken over. The times that we come together to worship. I was invited to a church a few years ago, and one of the deacons in the church spoke to me. He says, "You know, it really upset me this morning when I drove by the ball field and there were more people parked at the ballpark than there were parked in our parking lot of the church." I said, "Well, to me that says that you have a lot of opportunities to reach people in that community that you live in." But how our world is trying to take over the things of our Lord. Matthew 14:28-32. And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why do you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. We can be so close in our daily walk with our Lord, and then suddenly circumstances arise and turns everything upside down. Life situations come in all forms and fashions. I've noted one thing about the storms of life, that we're in one of three positions. Either we're about to go into a storm, we're in the midst of a storm, or we've just come out of a storm. July the 9th of 2003, Mary and I, on that Wednesday morning, were preparing to fly out and taking a mission team to Brazil. As we were making those final plans, and the mission team all coming in from different directions, arriving in the Mobile area to fly on that Friday morning, we were planning on a meeting that morning, but everything got turned upside down because early that morning she called me. I had gone up to the area where I was pastoring and helping out one of the church members. And she called me and says, "Bobby, something's wrong. I don't feel very good." And I said, "Well, just lay back down and I'll be home in just a little bit, and just pray that whatever this is clears up." Well, a few minutes later, my mother, who's sitting here by her, called and says, "Bobby, they're taking Mary to the hospital by ambulance. It's serious." And so I rushed to the hospital and meet them there in time to sign the paperwork for them to take her to surgery because she had had a heart attack and was putting a stent in to try to take care of that situation. That was on Wednesday morning. Thursday morning, I'm sitting there beside of her in the bed, And suddenly her left arm comes and slaps me in the face. Sometimes I probably need to be slapped. And she'll probably agree with that more often than I would admit. But what really scared me was not her slapping me in the face. It was like a block of ice hit me. Because you see, it was out of her control. A blood clot had lodged in her shoulder and affected the nerve and the muscle and everything. And immediately they began with anticoagulators, 3 different types of those. And Mary asked the question, well, what are some of the side effects? Because everything from Tylenol on, she has side effects from. We can talk about taking something for a headache and it'll put her to sleep. And it's hard to wake her up. They told her, says, well, the heparin, one of the side effects is seepage. That's all they said. We didn't think very much of it at that time. Well, by Saturday morning, early hours, I knew something was wrong, and I kept telling the nurses and the doctors as they came in, something is wrong. Mary's just not right. Nurse finally came in about 10 o'clock that night and said, everybody needs to leave. She's tired. That's what's wrong with her. Well, because our mission trip had been canceled because of that situation with her, I had gone home and just left long enough to get home. And the phone rings as I'm walking in the door. As I answer the phone, the young lady that was in charge of setting up all the logistics for our mission trip said, Mary's going to be great. We have just prayed for 7 hours for her because she knew what had happened. I'd called to tell her. She says, everything's going to be fine. And I said, well, praise the Lord. I know that. And hung up the phone. And as I hung up the phone, her sister that was staying with her called and said, Bobby, get down here in a hurry. Mary's body has just crashed. So I rushed back to the hospital. And as I rushed back to the hospital, I'm praying, Lord, I don't know what's going on, but she's in your hands. And finally, the doctor came out at 2:15 in the morning, Sunday morning, July the 13th. And he says, you might as well go home and wait until it happens, but you won't have a long wait. She will not live until daylight. I'm looking at my watch and I'm saying, now this is July the 13th, and it does not take long for the sun to rise in the middle of the summer like this. So that means that she only has about 2.5 hours. And so I said, Lord, I'm kind of selfish. I said, Lord, whether you take her to be with you, that'll be fine. Because I know she'll be with you. Or if you leave her, I'll take care of her, whatever kind of condition she's in. I said, but Lord, the one thing that I want is to see another smile on her face. Well, daylight rolled around. She's still alive. 6 o'clock rolls around, and the charge nurse for the isolation part of intensive care says, come on, I want you to go with me. He went over, punched in the code, and took me in there. There were people standing all the way around, shoulder to shoulder, all the way around her bed. But there was just enough room that as I rounded the corner and our eyes connected, with her face drawn from the paralysis where she had the bleeding on the brain, she smiled and I cried. And I said, okay, Lord, Thank you. I walked out, and two of our doctors that are real fine Christian friends of ours said, Bobby, I know you don't want to do this, but we need you to go home now and email everybody around the world that you know to pray for us to know what to do to take care of her, because we can't explain why she's here. I tell you, that was quite a storm for me. But oh, the touch, the peace that I had because of knowing that in the midst of the storm, that our Lord was there taking care of that. In Matthew 20:29 through 34, and as they went out of Jericho, a great crowd followed him. And behold, there were two blind men sitting by the roadside. And then when they had heard that Jesus was passing by, they cried out, Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David. And the crowd rebuked him, telling them to be silent. But they cried out all the more, Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David. And stopping, Jesus called them and said, what do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Lord, let our eyes be opened. And Jesus, in pity, touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight and followed him. Blind people that day had a very hard time because, you see, the only thing they could do was beg. There were no schools for them or anything to help them. And so begging was the one thing that they could do. But you know, as I studied through this passage, I thought about how Satan has blinded so many people of our world today. Blinded them to the truth of our Lord and what he is able to do. I want you to notice, though, as soon as their eyes were open, they began to follow Jesus. Think about so many people. Think about yourself this morning. When you chose to follow Jesus, how your eyes were opened. Sometimes we think, well, you know, being blinded to things. One of the people that provides translators for mission teams coming to the state of Rio in Brazil, is a good friend of ours. He was carrying me to the airport one afternoon, and as we were driving along the highway from the northern part of the state into the city of Rio, just before crossing the bay there near Niterói, as we were driving along, there's a ridge of mountains right there. And I asked Jonathan, I said, Jonathan, look at that mountain down on the end. I said, it's different. He said, what mountain? Now here's a guy that's driven for years by this mountain range many times, but he had never seen that. And I couldn't help but think how many people in our world today, they hear God's word, they see Christians, and yet they don't see. Mark chapter 5, verses 25 through 34. There was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much from their many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garment, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed from her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about into the crowd and said, who touched my garment? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. She had tried everything before going to Jesus. Going to Jesus was the very last resort. And I think about how many people try so many things in this world, and then after everything else has failed, and then turning to Jesus. How sad that is. You know, the world has so much to offer. And just like with this lady, with no positive results, it's only Jesus that can make the difference. And she knew that Jesus was the only answer to her problem. That same Jesus is the one that's the answer to our problems today if we just take them to him. In Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 17, soon after he went into a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. And as he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died and was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearer stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet is arisen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him spread through the whole of Judah and all the surrounding country. Can you imagine this? Here's the group with her, all weeping. And here comes this other crowd celebrating because they're in the presence of Jesus. And the roar of both of these crowds meet together. And suddenly there's silence. As Jesus says, "Don't weep." And then he calls that young man to rise. The joy then broke out in both, as both of them celebrated the touch of the Master's hand. Thursday morning I was sitting in my office, in the association office, and as I was sitting there, my cell phone rang, and a good friend of ours called that has not called in quite some time. After a very short greeting, he said, "Well, I wonder what you think of me for not calling for such a long time." And I said, we're still friends. I'm praying for you. And I know what happened to your wife. You see, his wife had a minor surgery procedure, developed a blood clot. He said, "But that's only part of the story." I said, "Oh?" He said, "Yes. A couple of months after that, my daughter had a heart condition when she was born. We knew about it. The doctors had said, just leave it alone. And then finally decided to do surgery. They flew her to Emory to do surgery on her. And in the midst of surgery, she died. And she says, I was devastated by all of this. And both of these bumps just has taken everything out of me. We talked for a little while longer, and I prayed with him. And he said, thank you. Thank you for reaching out to me. And I'm glad I made this call. He was very involved in church and had been a leader in the church that he attended for a number of years. He had worked with our mission board. And yet people did not come to minister to him with a double blow. And I thought about this woman losing her husband and then a son, and then our friend losing his wife and a daughter. And I thought about what a difference It wasn't because I prayed with him, but it was because Jesus touched him that he felt so much better. In Matthew 4:19 and 20, and he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. Jesus, for the next 3.5 years, poured his life into those disciples. And as he poured his life into those disciples, he modeled for them day after day as he taught and demonstrated his love to the people created in his image. He was preparing them for the ministry that he was going to be handing off to them after his death, burial, and resurrection. A little boy was in Vacation Bible School in 1958, enjoying all the activities of Vacation Bible School. And on Friday night, the pastor was up there preaching in the commencement service about hell and how bad hell was. The invitation was given. And that little boy that was sitting there enjoying Vacation Bible School, enjoying that message, with fear and trembling about how horrible hell was, said, "Well, my only choice is to ask Jesus in my life." And that night, sitting there on that front pew on the left-hand end, Bobby Morton felt the touch of the Lord as I accepted him. And what a great touch from the Master's hand. This morning, let me ask you, is Jesus calling you to follow him as Lord and Savior? Or maybe in obedience for baptism, to be called into ministry? Or is he calling you to just an obedience in a daily walk with him? Maybe there's some of you here today that just need a fresh touch of the Master's hand. In just a few moments, we're going to have an invitation. And as we have this invitation, there's some of you that need to come to this altar and just pray. Say, "Lord, I just need a fresh touch from you this morning." Someone may be here this morning and has never accepted Christ. The Bible says that today is the day of salvation. Maybe God's been dealing with you about making Crawford your church home. What a wonderful family to be a part of right here. I'm going to pray, and Brother Glad's going to be standing here, and I will be standing here. If you need to come, would you come? Father, as we come before you, we thank you for your word. We just thank you for your awesomeness, God. For your touch. Lord, I pray this morning, if there's one here this morning that has never accepted you, that this morning would be a time that they would give their life to you. Or there may be some here this morning that are just hurting, or just needing a touch from you of encouragement, a touch of your love. Or would you just have your way in hearts and lives? Bless this time of invitation as only you can, in Christ's name. Amen. As you stand to your feet.